The static on the radio was the sound of ghosts. It crackled with the final, grim sign-off from Commander Thorne, his voice, usually a baritone of unshakable confidence, stretched thin with the metallic rasp of defeat. Valkyrie, be advised. Mission is awash. I say again, awash. We are compromised. No extraction. It's over. Captain Eva Rostova, call sign Valkyrie, felt the words land like stones in her gut. Strapped into the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately nicknamed the Warthog, she circled at 10,000 feet, a patient predator hidden above a blanket of soupy grey clouds. Below her, in the labyrinthine alleys of a sun-scorched Syrian border town, Thorne and his SEAL team, Trident 7, were being systematically dismantled. She couldn't see them, but she could feel it, a cold dread that had nothing to do with the altitude. The command frequency was a chorus of affirmation for Thorne's call. Voices from a sterile, air-conditioned operation centre thousands of miles away agreed in clipped, professional tones. Copy that. Trident 7. Stand down, Valkyrie. Return to base. It's over. The phrase echoed in her helmet, a death sentence delivered with bureaucratic detachment. Over. For the men down there, the over was a bloody, final punctuation mark. For the commanders, it was a regrettable but necessary calculation. A lost asset. A neatly filed after-action report. For Eva, it was a lie. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the flight stick. The worn leather felt cool and familiar against her gloves, a stark contrast to the fire building in her chest. She could smell the faint, clean scent of ozone from the avionics and the lingering hint of jet fuel, a perfume she'd known her entire adult life. It was the smell of purpose. And her purpose was not to fly home while good men were erased. She had been their eye in the sky for the last 72 hours, a guardian angel with a GAU-8 Avenger cannon that could spit 3,900 rounds of armor-piercing incendiaries a minute. She'd watched them insert, a silent, ghostly procession under a sliver of moon. She'd kept watch as they moved through the sleeping town, their target a high-value arms dealer funneling stolen American military tech to insurgents. But then something went wrong. Terribly wrong. The town that was supposed to be sleeping erupted like a hornet's nest. An ambush. The intel had been bad. Or worse, it had been a setup. Now, the SEALs were pinned down in a crumbling stone marketplace, their ammunition dwindling, their numbers shrinking. Eva's screens painted a grim picture. Dozens of heat signatures swarming the SEALs' position. A relentless tide of enemy fighters. She could hear the pop-pop-pop of small arms fire bleeding through the comms, a frantic, desperate rhythm. They're walking mortars in on us. A younger voice from Trident 7 had gasped just minutes ago, before being cut off by a sharp, sickening cry. Valkyrie, did you copy my last? The Air Force colonel from CENTCOM demanded, his voice sharp, impatient. He already saw her as a problem. A hot-headed pilot with a history of pushing the envelope. He, like Thorne, had never quite trusted the only female A-10 pilot in the squadron. They saw her as a political statement, not a warrior. Thorne's dismissal of her over the radio just a week prior, during a briefing, still stung. With all due respect, Colonel, he'd said, a smirk playing on his lips, I'm not sure a warthog is the delicate instrument we need for this. We need a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He'd looked right at Eva. And we need a surgeon who won't get emotional. The memory was a splash of gasoline on the fire in her soul. Emotional. She keyed her MIC, her voice dangerously calm. Colonel, I have eyes on a potential extraction route. A northern alleyway. If I can clear the technicals blocking the path, they might have a window. Negative, Captain, the colonel shot back, his tone leaving no room for argument. Commander Thorne made the call. The risk to you and your aircraft is too high for a situation that is already lost. You will return to base. That is a direct order. Lost. There was that word again. She looked at her fuel gauge. She had enough for one good, hard pass. Maybe two if she pushed it. Enough to make a difference. Enough to turn a lost cause into a fighting chance. The A-10 wasn't a sleek, modern fighter jet. It was a flying tank, built around a cannon the size of a small car. It was designed to fly low and slow, to absorb punishment and dish out hell. It was stubborn, resilient, and brutally effective. Just like her. Thorne had called it a sledgehammer. He was about to find out how right he was. A new sound reached her ears, a high-pitched whine that wasn't coming from her engines. Her threat. Display lit up like a Christmas tree. Surface-to-air missile lock. The insurgents had manpads. The colonel's warning about the risk suddenly felt very real. This was why they were calling it off. It was a suicide run. Valkyrie, you have a missile lock. Break off, now! The colonel screamed. She could almost feel the eyes of the men in that distant command center on her, feel their judgment, their certainty that she would obey, that she would save herself. She thought of Thorne's smug face, of the quiet condescension she'd faced every single day. She thought of the young SEAL whose voice had been silenced mid-scream. They thought it was over. They thought she would run. Eva ignored the blaring alarm. Her thumb moved to the weapons release switch. She banked the Warthog hard, nosing the plane down, diving beneath the cloud cover. The grey mist evaporated, and the chaotic geometry of the town rushed up to meet her. She saw it all in an instant. The burning vehicles, the muzzle flashes, the swarm of enemy fighters closing in on the marketplace. And in the center of it all, the crumbling structure where the last 4 members of Trident 7 were making their final stand. She keyed her MIC one last time, not to the colonel, but on the SEAL's encrypted channel. Her voice was pure steel. Trident 7, this is Valkyrie. Hell is coming. Hold on. She armed the GAU-8. The colonel was still yelling her name, a furious, impotent voice from a world away. He didn't understand. None of them did. For her, this wasn't about orders. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about a promise she'd made to herself a long time ago. You don't leave anyone behind. Ever. The ground screamed toward her. The missile alert shrieked in her ears. She squeezed the trigger, and the sky ripped open with a sound like tearing. Thunder, the thunder she unleashed was not a random act of fury. It was a surgeon's cut. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, Thorne's so-called sledgehammer, spoke in a deafening, guttural roar that was famous among ground troops, a sound so terrifyingly distinct it was known as God's burp. For the insurgents tightening the noose around the marketplace, it was the sound of apocalypse. A stream of 30mm depleted uranium shells, each the size of a milk bottle, tore a perfectly straight line through their ranks. A pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted on the back, vanished in a red and orange blossom of fire and shrapnel. Men who had been alive 1 second were vaporized the next. Eva yanked back on the stick, the G-forces pressing her deep into her seat as she climbed, jinking hard to the left. The enemy missile, confused by her sudden, aggressive maneuver and the massive flare deployment she'd timed to perfection, screamed past her canopy, close enough for her to see the dark green of its casing. It detonated harmlessly against the empty sky behind her. She was clear, for now. But she had just declared war not only on the insurgents below, but on her own chain of command. The consequences of this day would follow her for the rest of her life, however long that might be. Her mind flashed back to a moment 6 months earlier, in the polished, sterile environment of a briefing room at Nellis Air Force Base. It was the genesis of the doubt, the seed of the insult that now fueled her righteous anger. Commander Thorne, a man carved from granite and arrogance, was outlining a complex joint ops training exercise. He stood before a massive screen, pointing a laser at a digital map. Eva, the only woman in a room of 20 elite operators and pilots, asked a question about air support contingencies. What's the protocol if the primary CAS platform is disabled? What's the response time for the A-10s on standby? Thorne had stopped, the red dot of the laser hovering over the map. He turned his head slowly, fixing her with a look that was part amusement, part annoyance. "Captain," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "my men are the best in the world. They don't plan for failure. They plan for success. Your job is to be on time if we call. Don't worry your pretty little head about the rest." The room fell silent. The other pilots stared at their notebooks. The SEALs shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. It was a small cut, a paper-thin wound, but it was designed to put her in her place, to remind her that she was an outsider in their world. The pretty little head comment was the part that had festered. It wasn't just sexism. It was a dismissal of her tactical mind, of the years of training and the sheer force of will it had taken to get into that cockpit. She had wanted to fire back, to dismantle his arrogance with a cold, logical list of missions where air support had been the deciding factor between life and death. But she hadn't. She had simply nodded, her jaw tight, and said, "Understood, Commander." The scar from that moment was invisible, but it burned hotter than any engine. Now, that same man was trapped, his plans for success having crumbled into dust. And she, the woman with the pretty little head, was his only hope. Valkyrie, what is your status? Acknowledge. The colonel's voice boomed in her ear, laced with a fury that promised a court-martial. I am currently engaged with hostile forces in support of Trident 7, she replied, her tone clipped and professional. She banked for another pass, her eyes scanning the chaos below. Her first run had been a shockwave, scattering the enemy and buying the SEALs a precious few seconds. Now they were regrouping, adapting. They were more disciplined than typical insurgents. They moved with a chilling efficiency, taking cover, setting up new firing positions. And they had more anti-air assets than the intel had suggested. Far more. This is not your call, Captain, the colonel roared. You are jeopardizing a billion-dollar asset and your own life for a failed objective. I am ordering you. Eva switched her comms channel, silencing him. She didn't have time for his rage. She needed to concentrate. The SEALs were moving, using the breach she'd created. They were falling back toward a more defensible building on the western edge of the marketplace. But there was a problem. A big one. A Zu-23-2 anti-aircraft gun, hidden under camouflage netting in the courtyard of a nearby mosque, was now barking at the sky. Green traces stitched the air where she had been moments before. It was a formidable weapon, capable of shredding her. A-10 to pieces if it got a clean shot. The intel brief had been explicit, no firing on culturally sensitive sites. The mosque was a no-strike zone. CENTCOM would rather lose a whole team of SEALs than face the political firestorm of blowing up a place of worship. It was a rule written in blood and headlines, and the insurgents knew it. They were using it as a shield. It was the perfect trap, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was the checkmate. She could engage the Zu-23 and be branded a war criminal, her career and life destroyed. Or she could leave it, and the gun would deny her the airspace she needed. To cover the SEALs' retreat, they would be picked off one by one. Thorne's voice, weak and strained, came over the SEALs' channel. Valkyrie, they've got us pinned. That AA gun, we can't move. He sounded different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw, ragged edge of desperation. He was talking to her, asking her for help. The man who saw her as a liability was now betting his life on her. The irony was a bitter pill. She looked at the mosque, its elegant minarets stark against the smoke-filled sky. Then she looked at the heat signatures of the four men huddled behind a bullet-riddled wall. For lives versus a building. For the men in the air-conditioned rooms, it was an easy, if tragic, choice. For her, sitting in the belly of the beast, it was no choice at all. She had to find another way. A way that wasn't in the rulebook. Her eyes scanned her instruments, her mind racing, connecting dots, processing angles and possibilities at a speed that felt supernatural. The A-10 carried a varied payload. She had high explosive bombs, cluster munitions, and Maverick missiles. All of them would obliterate the courtyard and half the mosque with it. Unacceptable. But she also had something else. Something designed for precision. Something Thorne would have called a scalpel. A plan began to form. A wild, audacious, and incredibly dangerous idea. It would require her to fly lower and slower than any pilot in their right mind would over a hot AA gun. It would expose her to a storm of fire. But if it worked, it would be the most beautiful, brutal piece of surgery anyone had ever performed. With a sledgehammer, she keyed her MIC Trident 7, I have a plan. But you're not going to like it. Get ready to move on my signal. And whatever you do, don't look up. Before Thorne could respond, she pushed the stick forward, beginning a steep, terrifying dive directly toward the mosque. The Zu-23 swiveled to meet her, its twin barrels spitting a torrent of green death. The entire world seemed to explode in noise and light. But Eva wasn't looking at the gun. She was looking at the wall behind it. The plan was insane, and it was already in motion. Her dive was a controlled fall, a screaming descent into the jaws of the beast. The A-10, a plane never known for its grace, felt like a meteor plummeting to Earth. The green traces of the Zu-23 were no longer distant stitches in the sky. They were thick, angry ropes of light, whipping past her armored cockpit with a sound. Like cracking whips. The sheer volume of fire was staggering. They weren't just trying to hit her, they were trying to saturate the air she flew through. Her entire airframe shuddered as shrapnel from near misses peppered her wings. An alarm blared. Her left engine was running hot. A round had struck the nacelle, but Eva's focus was absolute, narrowed to a single point. Not the gun. The wall. The thick, ancient stone wall of the mosque's courtyard. It was at least 5 feet thick, a solid barrier of history and faith. And according to the schematic she had memorized, behind that wall was a series of archways and support structures. It was a gamble based on a single, obscure line in an architectural survey of the region she'd reviewed weeks ago. A detail no one else would have even noticed. "Steady, girl, steady," she whispered to the plane, her voice a low hum that was more a part of the machine than the woman inside it. She was flying below the effective range of the manpads now, but directly into the teeth of the cannon. She selected her weapon, not the GAU-8, not the bombs. She chose the AGM-65 Maverick, an air-to-ground missile known for its precision. But she wasn't going to use it in the way its designers intended. She didn't target the gun. She targeted the wall in front of it. Her plan was terrifyingly simple in its physics and insanely complex in its execution. She would use the missile not to destroy the gun, but to move it. She would use the concussive force of the blast, funneled by the unyielding stone, to create a shockwave that would, hopefully, knock the heavy ZU-23 off its mount, rendering it useless without leveling the courtyard or touching the mosque itself. It was the kind of shot that simulators would call impossible. A 1 in a million chance. "Fox 2, she called out to the empty cockpit as she fired the Maverick. The missile leaped from its pylon, a streak of white smoke. She didn't wait to see the impact. The moment the missile was away, she pulled back on the stick with all her strength, her body screaming in protest as the G-forces tried to crush her. The A-10 clawed its way back into the sky, the damaged engine groaning. Below her, the Maverick struck the wall. The explosion was not the wide, blooming fireball of a typical bomb. It was a sharp, contained concussion. A massive cloud of dust and pulverized stone erupted from the point of impact. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, through the dust, she saw it. The ZU-23, its heavy steel frame twisted and broken, had been violently thrown on. It sighed. It was silenced. "Signal, Trident. Go, go, go," she yelled into the comms. The 4 heat signatures on her screen broke from their cover, sprinting across the open ground toward the western building. The remaining insurgents, stunned by the impossible shot, were slow to react. That moment of hesitation was all the SEALs needed. As she circled, providing cover with short, disciplined bursts from her cannon, a strange signal flickered across her data link display. It wasn't enemy jamming or a system malfunction. It was a ghost, an echo in the code. A tiny, encrypted data packet that had piggybacked on the insurgents' own communications network. Her systems automatically flagged and tried to delete it, classifying it as anomalous interference. But something made her pause. Her gut, the same instinct that had told her not to abandon the SEALs, screamed to her now. "Hold," she commanded her comms officer AI. "Isolate that packet. Don't delete it. Try to decrypt it." "Captain, that packet is non-standard. It could be a virus, a logic bomb," the synthesized voice warned. "Do it," she ordered. While her plane's computers worked, she focused on the fight. The SEALs had made it to the building, a 2-story concrete shell that offered better cover. But the enemy was already adapting, surrounding the new position. They were disciplined, well-equipped, and fighting with a ferocity that spoke of more than just fanaticism. They fought like professional soldiers, and they were using tactics she recognized. American tactics. The thought sent a chill down her spine. The arms dealer they were targeting. The one selling stolen military tech. What if he wasn't just selling it? What if he was using it? What if this wasn't just a band of insurgents? Decryption finished. A single line of text flashed on her screen, stark and terrifying. It wasn't a message. It was a shipping designation. A call sign for a piece of hardware. A prototype system so secret, its existence was only whispered about. In the highest echelons of the Pentagon, Project Chimera. Eva's blood ran cold. Project Chimera wasn't just stolen tech. It was a revolutionary piece of electronic warfare. A system that could mimic friendly IFF, identify friend or foe, signals, making enemy forces appear as friendly units on tactical displays. It could create ghost armies, hide entire battalions, and turn the most advanced surveillance systems into blind eyes. The ambush hadn't been just bad intel. The insurgents hadn't just gotten lucky. They had used Chimera to make their forces invisible. They had walked the SEALs into a trap by appearing as a friendly local patrol, and the data packet, it hadn't been a random echo. It was a command signal. The insurgents weren't just using the system. They were being controlled by it. Someone was directing them, coordinating their attack with a level of sophistication that was terrifying. This wasn't a simple arms deal gone wrong. This was a field test. Trident 7 were the guinea pigs. Suddenly, the mission had changed. This was no longer a rescue. It was about containing a threat that could destabilize the entire region, a threat that could neutralize America's technological superiority overnight. And the prototype was here, in this town. Controlling the very people trying to kill her, her plane shuddered again. A new alarm, shrill and insistent, screamed for her attention. It wasn't a missile lock. It wasn't engine failure. It was her IFF system. It was flickering, blinking between friendly and hostile. The Chimera system was trying to hack her, to turn her own plane against her, to make her appear as an enemy to any potential rescue force. Or worse, to take control. "Thorn," she said, her voice grim, all traces of her earlier triumph gone. "We have a bigger problem. This whole thing was a setup. They're not just trying to kill you. They're testing something. And I think I'm its next target." From the ground, Thorn's voice came back, laced with a new kind of fear. "Valkyrie, what? Are you seeing? We are picking up another aircraft. Coming in fast. It's showing a friendly IFF code. Is that you?" Eva looked at her radar. A single, fast-moving dot was approaching from the east. It was flying low, using the terrain for cover. And it was broadcasting the IFF signature of a US Air Force F-16. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it wasn't friendly. The Chimera system wasn't just on the ground. It was in the air. They hadn't just set a trap for the SEALs. They had set a trap for her, too. And it was just about to spring. Part 4, the Devils. "Gambit, that's not me, Thorn," Eva said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "I repeat, that is a hostile aircraft. They're spoofing a friendly signal." The silence on the other end was heavy with dawning horror. On the ground, Trident 7 had been fighting insurgents. A known, if deadly, enemy. But a hostile fighter jet. Masquerading as an ally. That was a nightmare of a different order. It meant their enemy wasn't some local warlord who'd gotten his hands on a prototype. It was someone with the resources to field a modern air force. "Command, this is Valkyrie." She broadcast on the emergency frequency, overriding the colonel's lockout. "I have an unidentified hostile aircraft approaching the AO. Repeat, hostile, spoofing a friendly IFF. Request immediate identification and support." The colonel's voice came back instantly, but it was laced with confusion and suspicion, not alarm. "Valkyrie, we see that contact. It's Falcon 4-1, out of Incirlik. They are on a routine patrol." "What are you talking about? Hostile?" "Sir, they're using a stolen EW prototype called Chimera," she explained, her words tumbling out, trying to make him understand the impossible. "It's masking their true signature. The ambush on the SEALs was a deliberate test of the system. This is the second phase." "Project Chimera is a ghost story, Captain," the colonel snapped back, his patience gone. "A conspiracy theory from the dark corners of the internet. You are hysterical. You disobeyed a direct order, fired on a protected site, and now you're seeing phantom enemies. Your actions are erratic and unjustifiable. Stand down and prepare to be escorted back to base. Falcon 4-1 will relieve you." He didn't believe her. To him, she was a rogue pilot who had cracked under pressure. The lie of the Chimera system was working perfectly, not just on the computers, but on the human mind. It was exploiting the militaries. Rigid trust in its own technology. No one wanted to believe their multi-billion-dollar identification systems could be so easily defeated. The F-16, or whatever it was now visible, a sleek grey raptor streaking across the desert floor. It was beautiful and deadly. And it was hunting her. The A-10 was a flying tank, but it was not a dogfighter. Against a nimble jet like an F-16, she was a lumbering bear facing a wolf. Her only advantages were her armor, her tight turn radius at low speed, and the element of surprise. But her enemy knew exactly who and what she was. "Thorn, listen to me," she said, her voice dropping, becoming intensely personal. "No one is coming for us. We are on our own. You have to get your men out of that building. They're going to use that jet to turn it into a crater." "Where do we go?" Thorn asked. The question was devoid of hope. They were surrounded, and now the sky itself was turning against them. Eva's mind raced, her eyes darting between the approaching hostile, the swarming insurgents, and the tactical map. There was only one chance. A desperate, insane gambit that played to her plane's unique strengths. There's a ravine, half a click to your west. It's deep. It might offer some cover from the air. I'm going to draw the wolf away. When you see your shot, you run. You run fast. You can't take him on, Valkyrie. Not in that plane, Thorn said, a note of genuine concern in his voice. The man who had mocked her was now pleading for her to save herself. "He's not expecting a sledgehammer," she replied, a grim smile touching her lips. "He's expecting a target." She pushed the throttle to the firewall, the damaged engine screaming in protest. Instead of running, she turned her Warthog to face the incoming fighter. It was the last thing the enemy pilot would expect. A challenge. A duel, the hostile jet, likely confirming with its own handlers that this A-10 pilot was indeed alone and unsupported, took the bait. It climbed, positioning itself for a classic high-speed missile attack. Eva's threat receiver lit up. He had a radar lock. "Here we go," she breathed. This was where the A-10 became a different kind of animal. She cut her speed dramatically, deploying her air brakes. The lumbering jet suddenly became an agile brawler. She pulled the stick hard into her chest, executing a turn that would have ripped the wings off a faster plane. The Warthog pivoted in. The air, the hostile F-16 overshooting her, its missile unable to cope with the sudden change in geometry. The sky became a deadly chessboard. The F-16 was faster, with better missiles and radar. But Eva was smarter, more experienced in the brutal, close-quarters dance of low-altitude combat. She dragged him down, into the canyons and valleys, where her slower speed and armored fuselage gave her an edge. It was a terrifying, exhilarating ballet of flares, chaff, and gut-wrenching maneuvers. The two planes twisted and turned, each trying to gain the fatal advantage. Below, the insurgents, seeing the aerial duel, renewed their assault on the SEAL's position with a terrifying ferocity. RPGs slammed into the concrete building, shaking it to its foundations. "Valkyrie, we're taking heavy fire. We can't hold out much longer." Thorn yelled. She heard the desperation, the crumbling resolve. She had to end this, now. She had one last trick up her sleeve, a maneuver so dangerous it was forbidden in training. It was called the dead man's jink. She let the hostile pilot think he had her. She flew straight and level for a few precious seconds, a perfect, tempting target. He took the bait again, closing in, hungry for the kill, likely switching to his cannons for a close-range finish. She watched him grow larger in her rearview display. Closer, closer, then, at the last possible second, she slammed her rudders, cut the throttle on her good engine, and fired a burst from her own cannon, not at him, but at the ground. The recoil of the massive GAU-8, combined with the asymmetric thrust and rudder input, threw the A-10 into a violent, uncontrolled-looking skid. To the enemy pilot, it must have looked like she'd been hit, that her plane was coming apart. He flew right into her trap. As he streaked past what he thought was a dying plane, Eva corrected her skid, the nose of her Warthog swinging around, perfectly positioned. She was now on his 6 o'clock, in perfect firing position. He had no time to react, her thumb found the trigger. "This is for Trident 7, she whispered, but as she was about to fire, her entire world went dark. Her screens, her HUD, her lights, everything blinked out. The roar of her engines died, replaced by the terrifying, sudden silence of a powerless glide. Every system was dead. The Chimera system hadn't just been trying to spoof her IFF. It had found a backdoor, a hidden vulnerability in the A-10's older, less integrated electronics. It had triggered a complete electrical failure. She was a ghost. A 30,000-pound glider, falling silently from the sky. The hostile F-16, realizing its incredible luck, was already turning to finish her off. Below, The SEALs building took a direct hit from an RPG, and a section of the roof collapsed. Eva could hear their shouts of pain and fear over the now battery-powered emergency radio. She was out of options, out of time, and falling to her death. It really was over. Part 5. Valkyrie's roar. The silence in the cockpit was the loudest thing Eva had ever heard. It was the sound of absolute failure. For a split second, panic, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm her. She was falling, a metal coffin with useless controls. The enemy pilot, no doubt laughing in his cockpit, was lining up his shot. The men on the ground were about to be overrun. The secret of Chimera would die with them, a weapon of unimaginable power left in the hands of an unknown enemy. Then, the anger hit. A pure, white-hot rage that burned away the fear. They would not beat her. Not like this. Her training, her instincts, her sheer, stubborn refusal to die, took over. Her hands flew across the dead instrument panel, moving with a life of their own. She wasn't thinking, she was doing. Main power was gone. The Chimera attack had been a brilliant, surgical strike against her electronics. But the A-10 was an old plane, a relic from an era before everything was run by a central computer. It had redundancies, and it had something no modern jet possessed: a manual, hydromechanical flight control system, a direct linkage of cables and pulleys from the stick and rudder to the control surfaces. It was a primitive backup, and it was about to save her life. She slammed a large, red lever labeled manual reversion. With a heavy, grinding clunk, the controls came back to life. They were sluggish, heavy as lead, like trying to steer a ship with a canoe paddle, but they were hers. She had control, but she still had no power, no weapons, no engine. No, wait. Her eyes darted to a small, unassuming switch protected by a yellowed plastic cover. The auxiliary power unit, the APU, a small turbine engine designed to provide power on the ground. It wasn't meant to be started in flight. The manual said it was impossible, dangerous. But the manual had never been in a situation like this. She flipped the cover and hit the switch. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, a low whine began, growing into a scream. The emergency lights flickered on. Her HUD, running on barebones power, blinked to life. She had a trickle of electricity. Enough. Engine restart sequence, she commanded the AI, which was now barely functioning. She followed the procedure, her hands a blur. One engine, the damaged one, sputtered and died. But the other one, the good one, caught. With a deep, shuddering roar, it coughed back to life. She had power. She had flight. She was back in the fight. The whole sequence had taken less than 20 seconds. To the enemy pilot, who had been savoring his victory, it must have seemed like a resurrection. He fired a heat-seeking missile, expecting to hit a dead piece of metal. But Eva, with one good engine and a plane that was barely holding together, threw the Warthog into a desperate dive, dispensing her last set of flares. The missile, drawn to the hotter energy source, veered away. She was alive, but she was crippled. Her advanced weapon systems were still offline. Her missiles, her guided bombs, all useless. But the GAU-8 Avenger, its firing system was old school, a direct electrical link from the trigger to the gun. As long as she had power, the gun would speak. The hostile F-16, furious and overconfident, came around for a cannon run. This was the moment of truth. The ultimate showdown. A modern, fly-by-wire killing machine versus a battered, half-dead relic. It was a fight Eva should not be able to win. But the enemy pilot made one fatal mistake, born of arrogance. He assumed she would try to run or engage in another turning fight. He didn't understand the heart of the A-10, or the woman flying it. She did the one thing he never expected. She flew straight at him. A head-on pass. A game of chicken at a combined speed of over 800 miles per hour. The distance closed in an instant. The world became a tunnel. There was only the grey jet growing larger and larger in her sights. Her HUD was flickering, but the targeting pipper was there. She put it right on his cockpit. He could break off. He could save himself. But his pride wouldn't let him. He fired his cannon, the tracers flashing past her. Eva didn't flinch. Her thumb depressed the trigger. The roar of the GAU-8 filled the world. It was not a burst. It was a solid, 3-second statement of defiance. A torrent, of uranium and fire that erased the air between the two planes. The F-16, with its delicate electronics and lightweight frame, simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a marvel of modern engineering. The next, it was a rapidly expanding cloud of fire and metal confetti. Eva flew through the debris cloud, her plane shaking violently. She was through. She was alone in the sky, but the fight wasn't over. On the ground, the insurgents were making their final push. She nosed her battered Warthog over, diving one last time. She had one good engine, manual controls, and a cannon. That was almost empty. She would make every bullet count. What followed was not a battle, it was a reckoning. She flew up and down the ravine, a vengeful angel of death, her cannon tearing the enemy apart. They had never faced anything like it. The sheer, terrifying noise of the gun, combined with its devastating impact, broke their will. They had been directed by a cold, calculating intelligence, but now that intelligence was gone, and all that was left was primal fear. They broke. They ran. She landed back at the base hours later, escorted by 2 legitimate F-16s who had been scrambled after. Her comms went dead. Her plane was a wreck, riddled with holes, trailing smoke from the dead engine. As she taxied to a stop, the entire airfield was silent. Fire crews and medics rushed to the plane. The canopy opened with a hiss, and Eva, bruised, exhausted, and emotionally drained, climbed out. The first person she saw was the colonel. His face was pale, a mixture of fury, disbelief, and something else, awe. But she walked right past him. Her eyes were on the medevac helicopter that had just landed. The ramp was down, and 4 figures, battered and bloody but alive, were being helped out. Trident 7. Commander Thorne saw her. He broke away from the medics and walked toward her, limping heavily. He stopped a few feet in front of her. The arrogance was gone, stripped away by the crucible of the last few hours. His face was a mask of grime and gratitude. He started, his voice cracking. We wouldn't have. You. He couldn't find the words. Eva just looked at him. She didn't need an apology. She didn't need a thank you. She just needed him to understand. It was never over, she said, her voice quiet but clear. Just then, a new commotion started. A team of Air Force security police, led by a grim-faced man in a suit, was cordoning off the command center. What's going on? The colonel demanded. The man in the suit turned to him. Sir, based on the data recovered from Captain Rostova's flight recorder, we've identified the source of the Chimera signal. It wasn't coming from Syria. It was coming from inside this base. A cold shock rippled through the crowd. A traitor. The setup, the ambush, the ghost in the machine. It had all been orchestrated from within. The man in the suit pointed toward the command center, where a senior officer, a man Eva recognized from briefings, a man who had always been dismissive of her, was being led away in handcuffs. He had been selling out his own people, testing a weapon for a foreign power, using men like Trident 7 as lab rats. His downfall was a direct result of Eva's refusal to stand down, her defiance in the face of impossible odds. The poetic justice was swift and absolute. Thorne looked from the traitor to Eva, his face a canvas of profound realization. He finally understood. She wasn't just a pilot. She was a warrior who saw the whole battlefield, who trusted her instincts over protocols, who fought with her heart as much as her weapons. He had called her emotional. He was right. Her emotion, her loyalty, her fury, her refusal to abandon her comrades, was the very thing that had saved them all. He slowly, deliberately, raised his hand to his brow in a sharp, perfect salute. One by one, the other 3 surviving members of Trident 7 did the same. Then the medics, the fire crews, the other pilots. A silent, spreading wave of respect. Eva stood there, the desert wind whipping her hair, the smell of smoke and jet fuel in the air. She had been mocked, underestimated, and ordered to stand down. But when the SEALs said it was over, she was the one who split the skies and roared back, "Not today." She didn't salute back. She just nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a debt paid and a respect finally, irrevocably, earned.